The trip back to Camelot was sheer torture for Lancelot. With every league he traveled, his anguish intensified, and the sight of Guinevere in danger tore at his insides. When Lancelot reached the Camelot gates, he was welcomed by Sir Gawain, who was waiting for him with a somber expression on his face. "Lancelot, thank God you have now returned. We need you." "Tell me everything, Gawain. How did the queen get kidnapped?" Gawain ushered them inside the castle, where King Arthur was awaiting in his quarters. The mood was heavy, and the court was shocked and dismayed. The knight found out that the queen had been kidnapped by Sir Meleagant, an arrogant and disloyal knight. He was holding her prisoner in an unknown location and wanted to make her his wife. Lancelot was listening attentively, restraining the anger welling up in his throat. The king said that he had dispatched messengers to Sir Meleagant, demanding the queen's immediate release. Several knights were sent to track down the whereabouts of the villain and the queen. "My king, I swear on my honor that I will by no means ever return to Camelot until I have saved Queen Guinevere from Sir Meleagant's hands. I will endure any danger, overcome any obstacle, and bring her back unharmed to this court, even if it costs my life." With his mission to rescue Guinevere in his mind, Lancelot got ready for the journey. His eyes, once heavy with anguish, now shone with determination. Sir Gawain, inspired by Lancelot's speech, also resolved to depart in search of the queen. Lancelot went along a narrow, dark path, where he came across a dwarf driving a cart. When he saw Lancelot getting closer, the dwarf asked him if he was looking for the queen. Lancelot said yes, and the dwarf, who detested the ostentation of knights, revealed a mischievous grin and challenged him to climb into the cart and be taken on a parade, so that he could reveal information about Guinevere's whereabouts. Being taken in the cart was a badge of dishonor in those days, and only criminals and prisoners were forced to travel in it. Aware of the humiliation this meant, Lancelot hesitated for a moment. But his love for Guinevere and his resolve to rescue her spoke louder. Lancelot brushed aside the embarrassment and climbed into the cart, following the dwarf in his search for the queen. From that moment on, his adventure took a new direction, punctuated by humility and sacrifice in the name of love. With an eerie smile, the dwarf led Lancelot through tortuous and hidden paths. The cart rattled and swayed, and the knight kept silent, resigned to the humiliation the circumstances imposed on him. After several hours of riding, they reached an imposing castle. Having fulfilled his part of the bargain, the dwarf led Lancelot to the castle gates, and the knight stepped down, feeling the weight of the prying and mocking eyes watching him. The dwarf told him that he would find clues to the queen's whereabouts there. Upon entering the castle, an elegant lady warmly welcomed Lancelot. But the presence of the chariot rider did not go unnoticed, and Lancelot endured the whispers and looks of contempt from the other noblemen present. Even so, he held his head high. But Lancelot was battling an internal conflict. The embarrassment of having traveled in the wagon tormented him, but his love for Guinevere drove him forward. He questioned whether he was being a true knight, if he was honoring the chivalric principles by submitting to such humiliation. But deep in his heart, he knew that his fondness for Guinevere was stronger than any moral code, and that he was willing to pay any price to rescue her. At nightfall, Lancelot was guided to a richly furnished room, where a lavish bed awaited him. Drained by the journey and the challenges he had faced, the knight lay down to rest, but sleep did not bring him the peace for which he had hoped. He dreamt that a funeral procession was drawing near, and in the center of it, a familiar figure was being carried, draped in a veil. As he drew closer, Lancelot horrifically identified the pale, motionless silhouette of Guinevere. The sight of his seemingly lifeless sweetheart shook him to the core, and for a moment, hopelessness seemed to overwhelm him. But Lancelot soon noticed that something was amiss. The procession did not exude sadness, and the faces of those who were with it did not reveal any mourning. On closer inspection, He noticed that Guinevere, although pale, was still faintly breathing. Hope was alive. As midnight approached, a flaming spear broke through the window, setting fire to the bed and the room. With sharp reflexes, Lancelot leapt from the burning bed, and with the help of a rug, managed to suffocate the flames and prevent the fire from spreading. The bed test, as it was known, was meant to prove the courage and endurance of those staying there. Again, Lancelot displayed his bravery and decisiveness, coming out of the ordeal without a hitch. Having survived the challenges in the castle and Guinevere's distressing vision, Lancelot received information about the path he had to follow. The next stage of his journey would lead him to the Sword Bridge, a dangerous passageway that protected the kingdom of Gore, Meleagant's domain. As its name implied, the bridge was made of a single, razor-sharp blade that cut through anyone who dared to cross it. Knowing the peril ahead of him, Lancelot showed no hesitation. He mounted up with courage and determination and set off towards the bridge. Upon arriving, he was greeted by a frightening sight. The blade glinted coldly in the sunlight, and the abyss that gaped beneath it seemed to swallow up the light. But the knight was not deterred. He took a deep breath and, with steady, confident steps, began to cross the bridge. Every footstep, the blade cut into his flesh, painfully wounding him. Blood ran down his feet, smearing the bridge with a red trail. The knight got off balance and almost fell, but he managed to hold on and pressed on, even though his hands were hurt. But Lancelot did not utter a single groan. His eyes were locked on the objective and his mind focused on Guinevere. Pain was merely an obstacle to be overcome, a price to be paid for his sweetheart's freedom. Lancelot reached the other side of the bridge in what seemed like an eternity. He was hurt and exhausted, but triumphant. The Sword Bridge, an apparently impenetrable barrier, had been overcome by the power of love. As Lancelot faced dangers and trials in his quest, Guinevere found herself imprisoned in a cold, damp dungeon in Meleagant's castle. The once glowing and soaring queen now found herself locked in a dark and despairing place. Angst and uncertainty consumed her, and the memory of Camelot, Arthur, and Lancelot stirred in her a twinge of longing and melancholy. In his obsession with Guinevere, Meleagant visited her every day, attempting to convince her to accept his love and become his wife. But the queen, loyal to her king and her heart, refused the villain's pleas, standing firm in her resistance. However, Meleagant did not give up his plans, and every day he put more pressure on Guinevere, threatening her with violence and punishment if she did not give in to his wishes. She trusted that Lancelot would come to rescue her, that the knight would endure any danger to save her from the tyrant's hands. This belief provided her with the strength to resist, to hold on to her dignity and hope during adversity. Lancelot, meanwhile, having overcome the Sword Bridge and nearing Meleagant's castle, was bracing himself for the final clash.